Let us now start this briefing webinar about the 2023 meetings of the conferences of the parties to the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. My name is Andrea Lechner. I'm a program officer in the Secretariat, and it's my pleasure to take you through this session today. Going to have a look at two different topics, one being the preparations from a more logistical and practical point of view, and secondly, we're going to look a bit into the main topics that will be discussed at the COPs. And at the end, of course, as always, there's time for any questions and answers or discussion. So, as you all know, the COPs are taking place in less than 2 weeks' time, starting on the 1st of May in the Geneva International Conference Center. It's the 16th COP for Basel, the 11th for Rotterdam and Stockholm. And as usually, we have preparatory meetings on site on the 30th of April. The theme that has been selected for these meetings is Accelerating Action, Targets for the Sound Management of Chemicals and Waste. And this theme is used for outreach and awareness raising activities around the conferences, for example, framing side events and also the fair that we're organizing this year. The meetings are fully face-to-face meetings, so there is no opportunity for online participation, the only exception being side events, but the COPs meetings themselves are fully face-to-face setting. There are no specific COVID measures like there were last year, so there is no testing requirement, there's no mask requirement, but of course there's a possibility for those who wish to wear masks. We'll also encourage you to keep hand hygiene, sanitizers will be available, and in particular if you have any flu-like symptoms, to not come to the venue but to test yourself, and then if you test positive for COVID, you're pleased not to come to the venue for 5 days at least. The meetings do not feature a high-level segment. That will come again at the next COPs. You have here the list of your presidents for the Basel Convention. That is Reginald Hernos from the Netherlands. For the Rotterdam Convention, Anna Berechiani from Georgia. And then from Stockholm, it's Kima Gardina from Trinidad and Tobago. I'll talk a little bit later about the fair and the side events, but the topic that has been selected this year for the fair is PCB and the related targets under the Stockholm Convention. And on this website, you can find a lot of detailed information, all the meeting documents, practical information, etc. about the meetings. Looking then at registration and credentials, well, the official registration deadline has passed long ago. At this point in time, for parties, it is still possible to register for the COPs, but only non-funded. Really, we're no longer in a position to process financial support or travel in accordance with the UN rules, so only self-funded participants can still register. If you still register during this week, you can do the pre-registration, so you can still contact the Secretariat with your nomination letter and your registration form. So until this Friday, and then as of this Friday, we're really stopping pre-registration, and from then on, you would really need to come directly to the meeting venue and hand over your registration details there. Because next week we're no longer doing any pre-registration. We really need to transfer all the registrations to our system and get ready for the COPs. The same applies for observers. They can also still register either pre-registration this week or then on site afterwards. But for bodies and agencies not yet admitted as observers, the deadline really has passed and we're no longer in a position to admit new observers to the COPs. Then on site, on Sunday, the 13th of April, we're starting at 10 a.m. and then on Monday at 8 a.m. and all the other days as of 9 a.m. And if you have a possibility to come already on Sunday to get your badge, that would be excellent because it's usually quite a rush on Monday morning ahead of the plenary start. We'd also like to thank the donors that have contributed to enabling us to provide financial support for the COPs, but also for the regional preparatory meetings. It's very much appreciated, and we've been in a position to fund up to 3 delegates per party for the COPs and up to 2 for the regional preparatory meetings. For credentials, the approach is the same as always. The bureaus have decided that they will be accepting originals and copies that are in good order, on the understanding that originals will be submitted as soon as possible. There is a model for the credentials on the website, and the submission should be done, if possible, no later than 24 hours after the opening of the meetings, so by 10 a.m. on Tuesday. We have invited you to provide electronic copies by email by 7 April. You can still do that, but please only send them in by email and bring the originals in person to the meeting venue. It's very difficult if you start sending originals now by postal mail. There's quite a chance it will not reach us in time for the COPs, so please bring them in hand to the meetings. Okay, let's have a look at the schedule of the week. So this is a simplified version of the schedule that is set out in the information document number 2. So that's quite an important document. If you're trying to get an idea of how the COPs will run, it's Inf 2. And the other important document is Inf 1. That is the scenario note, and it's a narrative description of how the meetings will run. So quite similar in content, but Inf 2 is a table and Inf 1 is a narrative document. So on the Sunday before the meetings start, we have pre-meetings. There's the bureau meeting for bureau members only from 1 to 3 p.m. And then as of 3 p.m., regional meetings can take place. So we have made provision for rooms for all the regional groups from 3 to 6 p.m. But this is really just to make rooms available to you. Of course, in the regions you can meet however you wish. And if you want different meeting room times, please just contact the Secretariat and indicate your need for different meeting time for the regional meetings. We're then starting on Monday the 1st of May with the opening ceremony of the COPs. There will be a possibility for regional statements for a duration of maximum 5 minutes. And any longer statement, national statements, sub-regional statements, they can be provided in writing and will be updated on the intranet page. After the opening, the presidents will adopt their respective meeting agendas, and then we'll look into organizational matters, which is to agree on the organization of work, also to agree on the approach on the elections and the approach on the credentials. So on these 2 items, credentials and elections, it's merely an introduction, and then these are considered over the 2-week period. And then we start with the first with the first substantive matter, and that is POPs waste. So that's a joint issue among the Basel and the Stockholm COPs, and that will be taken up in the morning still. And then in the afternoon, we have an early session for the Basel Convention, a convention-specific one, where they will continue the consideration of technical guidelines. So the POPs waste technical guidelines will already have been taken up in the morning under the item POPs waste. And then here they can start taking up other technical guidelines, thinking particularly of the plastic guidelines to start the work there, because there's a lot going on, and other technical guidelines as time allows. The intention is then to also introduce a further legal clarity that morning to give sufficient time to the contact group to work on this topic. However, the timing given to these 2 items would need to be strictly limited, because then in the later afternoon, the Stockholm Convention is to introduce the listing of chemicals. As of Tuesday, every morning, the COPs would jointly hear reports of the contact groups and other groups that have met the night before or the day before. Tuesday would then continue with joint issues. We have technical assistance, and then we have compliance, and that's a bit new because we have a joint introduction of the compliance matters. So that means the Secretariat will introduce all the documents for Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm. And then for the 2 conventions that have a compliance committee, so that is Basel and Rotterdam, the respective chairs will also report on their work. But then there will not be any discussion. The discussion on compliance matters will take care in the convention-specific sessions. So this is merely a first introduction. Then we would look into the program of work and budget and the memorandums of understanding and send these off to a contact group. In the afternoon, Stockholm would then continue with its work. So first of all, it would start with continuing its consideration of compliance. That's where the discussion and agreement on the next steps would take place. Then they would go into the other more technical issues, effectiveness evaluation, exemptions, PFOS and DDT, and continuing on Wednesday with PCB, the unintentional releases of POPs, national implementation plans, and reporting. On Wednesday, the 3rd of May in the afternoon, that's also a change compared to the past, there is a convention-specific session for Rotterdam, so an early session, with the intention of allowing an introduction of this new amendment proposal that is being put forward by a number of countries that relates to creating a new Annex 8 to the convention. So only that part of the agenda item will be introduced on that afternoon. And also very important, the bureaus have agreed that if a contact group is set up to take care of this issue, it would only start meeting as of Sunday, 7 May. So here's just the introduction and discussion in plenary, and contact group would start on Sunday, 7 May. This is what the bureaus are putting in front of you or in front of the COPs for agreeing. So if there's any change on this arrangement, it would need to be discussed under the agenda item on organization of work. Then the discussions would continue in joint session. So it would continue with financial resources and mechanisms. That item was in the past always jointly with the technical assistance item or right after it, but this time they have been a bit separated. But the intention is still the same, that any matters that need further consideration in contact group, in particular as they relate to the Stockholm financial mechanism, would then be sent to the same contact group that started the day before working on technical assistance matters. Then there would also be cooperation and coordination items considered, namely the cooperation with the Minamata Convention, followed by cooperation with other organizations. On Thursday, the 4th of May, Stockholm would take any decisions that are ready and look into rules of procedure. And then once again, here the session is split and there's a joint discussion then on synergies in preventing illegal traffic and trade, followed by the dates and venues of the next meetings of the COPs, and then other matters related to the admission of observers. In the afternoon, Stockholm would continue adopting decisions and also consider other matters that are convention specific, but actually we are not planning for any right now. We're not aware of any other matters that will be taken up there. Friday morning, the Basel Convention would then fully start its agenda items. It would continue with technical guidelines, any that wouldn't have been introduced on Monday afternoon. Then it would go to the strategic matters, strategic framework, enhancing the PIC procedure and ESM guidelines. And then it would continue its discussion on compliance. So in the case of the Basel Convention, the agenda item is called Implementation and Compliance Committee, but that is the continuation of the discussion that started on Tuesday in joint session. Friday afternoon would then be the last Stockholm Convention specific session. The idea being that all convention-specific items should be finalized by the end of these convention-specific blocks. So hopefully as much as possible, all Stockholm items would be finalized by Friday afternoon and decisions adopted, and then also the meeting report. It would be followed by a joint session, just a quick one, to adopt the reports on credentials. So that's the bureaus agreed on a two-step approach, that the first consideration of the credentials will take place on Friday, 5th May. And then if there are any updates, these would be added in the second week. Saturday, 6th May is a day off. There are absolutely no meetings taking place and the meeting venue is closed. In the second week, Basel would then continue with all its matters, national legislation, the amendment proposal by the Russian Federation, the various partnerships topics, and then in the afternoon with the classification, reporting, electronic approaches to movement document, further consideration of plastic waste, then the amendments, the e-waste amendments to the convention and nanomaterials. On Monday, there would be start of the consideration of draft decisions coming back from the various groups, then also consideration of the work program of the open-ended working group, and then any other matters. Also here, we're not aware of any at this point in time. Monday afternoon, Rotterdam would then also start with all its remaining agenda items. It would start with the continuation of the discussion on compliance. And then it would start introducing the listing of chemicals, which is expected to take maybe even more than one session, given that there are so many chemicals, and to continue on Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday morning, Basel would continue adopting decisions. And then Tuesday afternoon, Rotterdam continuing with listing of chemicals. And then also the agenda item on enhancing the effectiveness would continue. Because as I said before, there are various sub-items under this agenda item, and only the one on the new amendment proposal would be taken up in the first week. So here in the second week, the COPs would consider the other amendment proposal that is in front of the COPs. It's an older one from a group of African countries that was submitted at COP 8, related to amending Article 16 of the Convention. And then also there's a short discussion on an information dissemination strategy that has been developed under this agenda item. Remaining items are then the status of implementation of the Rotterdam Convention rules of procedure and other matters. If there are any, from what we know right now, we would simply close this agenda item then. Then on Wednesday, Rotterdam could consider any decisions coming back, and then there would also be a joint session to consider the last joint issues, the clearinghouse mechanism, gender mainstreaming, and from science to action. The afternoon is the last session of the Basel Convention, well, the last convention-specific session, as we say, so hopefully all of the Basel Convention-specific items can be finalized and adopted here, as well as the meeting report. And then after that, the COPs would jointly adopt the report of the meetings as they pertain to joint sessions that took place in the first week. Thursday morning dedicated to Rotterdam, and then in the afternoon, there is a joint session where any joint issues that had been taken up in the course of the 2 weeks but not yet adopted would be adopted, with the only exception of the budget that comes on the following day. And then there would also be a possibility to make an update to the credentials if there's any development since the first week. Friday, last convention-specific session for Rotterdam. Hopefully all decisions are adopted by then, as well as the meeting report. And as usually optimistically, we plan that all we need to do in the afternoon is to adopt the 3 budgets and then to close the meetings. Here you can see a list of the potential contact groups or also other groups that we are foreseeing. That's also contained in information document number 2. And it's the usual groups in a way. On joint issues, we have one on program of work and budgets. Then we have one on technical assistance and financial resources and mechanisms. And there's provision for a joint issues contact group that we're thinking where we might need further work would in particular be on international cooperation and coordination, potentially also on synergies in illegal traffic and trade. So these are the issues that we're thinking now might need further work in a contact group. On Stockholm, we expect that there's a need for further work on the chemicals proposed for listing, as well as for compliance. And then Basel would have its usual 3 groups: technical matters, strategic matters, and compliance and legal matters. For the Rotterdam Convention, we very much expect that there's a need to further discuss the new amendment proposal in a contact group and enhancing the effectiveness of the convention. And also there might be a need for further discussion on compliance, noting that it's a relatively easy topic. It is to agree on the program of work of the compliance committee. And what we're envisaging right now is that there might be a joint contact group for the first 2 Rotterdam topics. So for enhancing the effectiveness and for compliance, that might be one group taking care of these issues. And finally, there's also a possibility that under Rotterdam, there will be a contact group on the listing of chemicals. As always, we will try to limit the number of contact groups running in parallel. The intention being that not more than 2 groups run in parallel to plenary, and also in the evening we'll try to restrict to 2 groups only. Election is, of course, an important topic for the COPs. Here you can see an overview table of all the different positions that are available. So there are, of course, the bureaus of each of the 3 COPs, together with the presidents. And if the principle of regional rotation is followed, it would be expected that the next Basel COP president comes from Eastern Europe, that the next Rotterdam Convention president comes from Asia Pacific, and the next Stockholm COP president to come from the WEOC group, so Western Europe and other states. Then you can see on the Basel, they're also to elect the OEWG Bureau, the members of the Implementation and Compliance Committee, half of them actually, roughly, and then on this network that is working on combating illegal traffic under the Basel Convention called in force, there are also a couple of parties and regional centers invited to make nominations. Under Rotterdam, there are an election of roughly half of the Compliance Committee members and roughly half of the Chemical Review Committee members. And under Stockholm, very similar, also half of the POPROC members, so that's the POPs Review Committee, and then also there's a need to identify parties that would nominate experts for the DTT expert group. Very important for the elections are the rules and requirements. So the Secretariat has always tried to facilitate this process to make it as smooth as possible at the COPs. So we have sent out information packages, we've provided them to the bureaus, and we have invited parties to inform us by 1st of March of potential candidates for election, noting that this is not a firm deadline, this is just an invitation to provide information at that point in time, so that parties have a possibility to consider it a bit upfront ahead of the COPs, for example, during the regional preparatory meetings. The bureaus have identified regional focal points for each of the regions. So these are the people that are working on the elections, that during the COPs will be working on completing the sheet per region on all the candidates for the election. So yes, if you have any questions, you can either contact the Secretariat or also these regional election focal points that will be gathering your candidates during the COPs. Very important for elections are also the rules. So the most important one is the arrears rules. So if your country has 2 or more years of arrears under the conventions, you are not eligible for a number of positions. In the case of the Basel Convention, it's for being a member of the COP Bureau or a subsidiary body bureau. In the case of the Rotterdam and Stockholm COPs, it's even a little bit stricter. You could not be a member of the bureau of the COPs, but neither a member of the subsidiary bodies. So in the case of Basel, it's a bureau member of the subsidiary bodies, but in case of Rotterdam and Stockholm, it's any member of the subsidiary bodies. And these rules do not apply for least developed countries, small island developing states, and parties that have agreed to and are respecting a schedule of payments. So if you wish to present a candidate for elections and your country has arrears of 2 or more years, please quickly contact the Secretariat in order to agree on a schedule of payments, but also to note that it has to be respected. So if we have past schedules of payments and they haven't been respected, then that will be an issue for the elections. Please also keep in mind other criteria, for example, qualifications that are needed. In the case of CRC and POPROC, you need to submit a CV as well as a declaration of conflict of interest. Please take into account the languages that the bodies are working in, time requirements, travel requirements, etc. We'd like to draw your attention to guidelines for rules of conduct for meeting participants. So these are quite important to ensure an orderly running of the COPs and also subsidiary body meetings. We have guidelines on the use of camera and audio-video recording devices, guidelines on the participation of observers, and guidelines on preventing and addressing all forms of harassment. So this is in line with the UN policy of zero tolerance towards any form of harassment, and our Executive Secretary is taking these very seriously. So if you encounter any incidents or have any issues during the COPs, please do contact the Secretariat. It's very important for us that everybody can, in a pleasant way, participate in these meetings. We're having side events as usually. So side events are an opportunity for parties and observers to share knowledge, build capacity, do some networking, exchange on experience and best practices on how to implement the conventions. And they are taking place during the lunch break and then in the evening after plenary for an hour and a half. And a schedule of the side events is now available on this website. So all organizers have been informed and slots have been allocated. Please keep in mind that all organizers and speakers at these side events need to be registered for the COPs. And you'll find all the information on that on this website. And then secondly, we have the PCB fair. So as already mentioned, the fair always relates to our theme of the COP. And this year it would be to raise awareness on the urgency to accelerate action to meet the upcoming deadlines under the Stockholm Convention related to the elimination and environmentally sound waste management of PCB. And also to raise awareness on other targets and deadlines under the conventions. And there will be a number of events organized between the 3rd and the 5th of May, starting with an opening on the 3rd of May at lunchtime, and then usually ending with a small reception on the 5th of May. And these are interactive events, exhibitions, booths, side events. And yes. So here you also have the website with further information. And that reminded me that I didn't mention that, but there's also a reception planned on the first Monday of the meeting. So the government of Switzerland is kindly hosting a reception on the first Monday, the 1st of May. We've held the regional preparatory meetings in the 4 usual regions: Asia Pacific, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America and the Caribbean. And we hope that they have contributed to your preparations for the COPs. Let's then have a quick look at the main or a couple of the key items on the provisional agendas, because it would take us several days to go through all of these items in detail. So it's really just a quick glance at a couple of main issues. So under the Basel Convention, the strategic issues, there'll be a discussion on the strategic framework, in particular on how to proceed on the revision of the existing framework, because the COP decided in the past that rather than developing a new framework, it would revise the existing one. And here the next steps would need to be agreed on by the COPs. On enhancing the PIC procedure, there has been some collection of information in the sessional period, and there's a recommendation coming from the open-ended working group that the COP should set up a small, an intersessional working group in order to develop recommendations on how to enhance the PIC procedure. And that will be looked at the COP, in particular, once again, what nature this group would have. On scientific and technical matters, there's a number of technical guidelines that have been updated for consideration by the COP. Those are the plastic waste guidelines, but also COPS waste guidelines have been updated to reflect the most recent listing under the Stockholm Convention. Then updated guidelines on waste lead acid batteries have been prepared, and new guidelines on other types of batteries. Also, the e-waste guidelines have been updated, so all of these for consideration by the COPs. There'll be a discussion on how to further proceed on the work on electronic approaches to notification and movement documents. On plastic waste, the discussion will also continue on what further activities are needed in the area of plastic waste. And then as a follow-up to the amendments at the last COP related to e-waste, there will be an assessment of the need to update existing guidance. In the area of the Basel Convention partnership programs, we have the 4 partnerships that you can see here. And there also, the COP will in particular look at the program of work of these partnerships for the next biennium. On legal governance and enforcement matters, there is the work of the Implementation and Compliance Committee. So the COPs will hear what the committee has been doing in a very short intersessional period related to specific submissions from parties, but also the work on its general review mandate, which includes work on national reporting, illegal traffic, and national legislation. And then the COP will also look into the program of work of the committee for the next biennium. Under further legal clarity, there are two areas. The first is the amendment proposal from the European Union on Annex 4, and the second is the string of work from the expert working group on the review of Annexes 1 and 3. Rotterdam Convention will look at the program of work of the compliance committee for the next biennium, and then also on the listing of chemicals. There are two new chemicals in front of the COP for consideration for listing. The two are pesticides, it's iprodion and turbofos. And then there are 5 old chemicals that have been considered by past COPs, but no agreement on listing was reached. These are acetochlor, carbosulfan, so those are 2 pesticides. Then there's chrysotal asbestos, an industrial chemical, and then 2 severely hazardous pesticide formulations, Fentium formulations and paraquat formulations. Quite some discussion is expected on the topic of enhancing the effectiveness, in particular this new amendment proposal that is co-sponsored by quite a range of countries by now, about adding a new Annex 8 to the Convention. So just to say a quick word, that the intention of that amendment proposal is to react to the problems that have been encountered in the past in listing chemicals that have been recommended by the CRC for listing in Annex 3, but the COP does not manage to reach agreement on the listing, despite recognizing that all the criteria for listing have been met. And the intention of the proposal is to add a new Annex 8 to the Convention, where chemicals could be listed for which there's no agreement in listing in Annex 3. And the listing in that new Annex 8 could be done if no consensus is reached by a vote. And then there's also, in connection, a couple of annexes to the Convention would need to be amended in order to establish all the rights and obligations of parties in relation to this new Annex 8. And also to note that the PIC procedure that would apply with this new Annex 8 is slightly more stringent than the current one, as it would really require an explicit consent to an export of chemicals. And then also under this agenda item already mentioned, there's also the proposal from a number of African countries to amend Article 16 of the Rotterdam Convention. On Stockholm, looking at the intentional POPs, there is an evaluation of the continued need for the use of DDT in residual vector control. Then we have on PCB, there's an assessment of the progress towards the elimination of PCB. As already mentioned, there are goals related to the elimination of PCB in 2025 and environmentally sound waste management by 2028. So that's coming very, very soon, and it's a very challenging targets because a lot of work still needs to be done, and there's huge also funding needed in order to achieve these goals. So the COPs will be looking into that and also into a strategy on how these goals could be pursued. Other technical work will relate to PFOS, its salts and PFOS-F. There we have recommendations from the POPROC on the continued need for the exemptions and acceptable purposes. And then also very important, under Stockholm will be the listing of chemicals under the convention. So there are 3 new chemicals that will be considered. The first is methoxychlor. That's a pesticide which has been used as an insecticide in the past. The POPROC in its evaluation found that it's not, it couldn't really determine if it's still that much produced and used, and if there's any needs that couldn't be met with alternatives. So their recommendation is to list it without specific exemptions in Annex A. The next one is Decloran Plus. So that is a flame retardant and has been marketed as a replacement for commercial decabromodiphenyl ether. And here the situation is quite more complex. POPROC has identified the need for some specific exemptions. So it is proposing to list it in Annex A to the Convention with some exemptions. For the production and use, these exemptions would be limited to 5 years for some specific applications in aerospace and medical uses. but that there would be a longer proposal for the availability of replacement parts and repair of articles that are using these products, and that is proposed to go either until the end of service life of these products or until 2044. Once again, similar applications, aerospace, but also motor vehicles, medical equipment, etc. And then the third one is UV328, and that is a UV observer that is absorbing UV lights, and it is used in many applications, including as an additive to plastics, but also in the automotive industry, in paints, in coatings, in rubbers. So very similar to Declaram Plus, there's a proposal to have a specific exemption for production and use for 5 years, but then to allow a longer period for replacement parts for those applications that are already in use until the end of service life or 2044, whatever comes earlier. So that will surely require some discussion. For compliance, the Stockholm Convention is the only of the 3 conventions that doesn't have a compliance mechanism in place yet. So the COP will continue its consideration of possible adoption of a compliance mechanism, and there are 2 draft texts available that are set out in this meeting document. Related to national implementation plans, there has been revised guidance developed and also a draft global approach to the review and updating of NIPs that the COP will consider. And then reporting, an updated electronic reporting system has been developed. And here are some of the main joint issues. There's of course technical assistance with the technical assistance decision, but also this year is the year where the review of regional centers is due. And then also under financial resources, we expect of course some discussion, especially on the Stockholm financial mechanism. So this year is not a year where a review of the financial mechanism is taking place, but the COP is to look at the terms of reference for the next review of the financial mechanism and also for the next funding needs assessment. The COP will also look into guidance that has been prepared, well, that has been given to the GEF as the principal entity on an interim basis of the financial mechanism of the Stockholm Convention, and see if there is a possibility of streamlining a little bit all this guidance that has been given over the past years. On international cooperation and coordination, there is an item on cooperation with the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and then also an item on cooperation with other organizations where there's quite a lot going on, so many different topics that will be considered and discussed. On enhancing cooperation and coordination among the conventions, there are several of these synergies items on the agenda, but as already mentioned before, the one probably requiring a bit more discussion will be the one on synergies in preventing and combating illegal traffic and trade. In particular, there has been an assessment going on what kind of cooperative arrangements there exist under the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions for combating illegal trade. And the conclusion was that there isn't that much available and that the COP might wish to consider different options on how to react to that. For example, there could be a possibility of extending the scope of the arrangement that exists under Basel Convention, which is the enforced network, and to have that cover Rotterdam or Stockholm, or to look into establishing a new platform specific to Rotterdam and Stockholm, or to see if current cooperative efforts could be strengthened. Program of work and budget, of course, is always a big and important issue. The COPs are to adopt the budgets for 2024-2025. And very much linked to that, we also expect quite some discussion on the memorandums of understanding between UNEP and the COPs. In the case of Rotterdam, also between UNEP, FAO and the COPs. There has been some issues in the past related to the coverage of some costs for the running of the Secretariat, whether these would be covered by the assessed contribution of parties or by UNEP. And because of this disagreement on where the costs are to be covered from, there is now a proposal on the table from UNEP to amend the MOUs in order to clarify the coverage of these costs. So this is an item that will need to be discussed at the COPs, and it will be done so in the contact group on program of work and budget. And finally, just a little overview of the other webinars that we're organizing this week, including in Spanish and French, should anybody be interested in registering again for any of these webinars. Thank you very much for your attention. And now is time for any questions, comments, or discussions that you might wish to have. I see that some first comments have already arrived. So please, if you have any comments or questions, you can now either type them into the chat or you raise your hand and I'll pass you the floor to make your intervention orally. So thank you. I'll start answering in a minute on the first questions. Thank you. Question that came in writing. I saw it popping up when we were on the side event slide. So from Nicole asking when we will know which side events will be accessible virtually. So that will be made available on the website, on the intranet, in the schedule of the side events. So we are currently still working on it. So we're thinking about the beginning of, well, actually Monday is a UN holiday, so maybe rather mid of next week, we would have that information available on which side events can be joined also virtually. I hope that is fine. So let's move on to the raised hands. I see a first hand from Vera Hera. Would you please like to take the floor?
Sure, sure. I just want to clarify now the future webinars, the content of the future webinar will be same as today or it's a different aspect like?
Thank you. No, it's absolutely the same webinar. So if you have participated today, there might not be a big need to come again. They are just on different timings to cater to different time zones and then different languages.
Sure, noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then let's move on to Ron van Peer from CropLife, please.
Thank you, Andrea. It's Ron van Peer of CropLife. And thank you for the excellent overview. This is very helpful. As always, it's going to be a challenge, I guess, but I'm sure we will make it again. My question is somewhat unrelated to the immediate content, and it's as follows. We're struggling to get some visas in time. And I was wondering, is there a way the Secretariat could be of help in getting the visa accelerated in some of the countries?
Check. Thank you. I was just checking with my colleague and we'd need to check. I mean, I know that for parties, but I have to say the only thing we actually can do is to send the confirmation letter to the relevant embassies. So I need to see if that is something we also do for observers. I'll check with my colleague and get back to you after the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. But not, you know, all we do in a way is to confirm that you are actually registered to the meeting. So I'm not sure it helps in speeding up, but that's the service we can offer. Okay. Let me see. So we have one other written question in the meantime. Yes, so absolutely the slides, actually you will be able to download them right away. I mean, during the webinar still will allow you to download the slides, but we're also sending them by email after the webinar. And then also the recording takes a little bit longer. We usually put all the recordings then on the website after a couple of days. But the slides you'll get quite immediately after the meeting. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you. I see we have one other written comment that on registration, some observers haven't received yet the confirmation letters. So I'll check on that. We'll also check on if there's anything pending. Yeah, I mean, our intention is that we finalize all the registrations this week, as I said, because the next week we're stopping the pre-registration. So we'll make sure that you get your registration letters in the course of this week. Okay, in the meantime, we consulted our colleagues, Ron, on your question on the visa. So absolutely, we can also facilitate visa procedures for observers. So the best would be if you contact the person you've been in touch with for the registration and mention that these and these people have visa issues, and tell us if they give us the contact of the embassies in the countries, then we can contact them and confirm that you are a registered participant of these meetings and that they please provide you with a visa. So yeah, please do contact the Secretariat for all the colleagues that are concerned with visa issues. Our colleagues on the issue of the outstanding confirmation letters, so I can still respond to you on that. So last chance if you have any new questions or comments. Except, I mean, if you registered really late, then it's normal that you haven't received your letter yet. But if you registered quite some time and you haven't heard from us, then please do recontact us. Then there might be an issue, because our colleagues are telling us that all except very late registrations have been processed and have received the confirmation letters. So then there could be some issues if you haven't received it yet. So and actually they're telling us that confirmation letters were still sent last Friday. So if you registered before then, normally you should have gotten your letter. So if you registered before then, please contact us again. There might be some issue or the communication might have been lost. Okay. Do a last check if there are any other questions. Okay, I see a comment that there's no available date at the embassy to travel by 1st of May. Well, you can obviously also come later. Some participants also come in the course of the week. It's no problem. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you very much. Yes, the file transfer. Thank you, Emily. So you have a window popping up now where you can click on the presentation and then on the file name and then on download. And then you can download the file right away. Otherwise, we'll also send it to you by email afterwards. We're just going to leave that open for 1 or 2 more minutes for you to download the file. But other than that, thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you in less than 2 weeks at the COPs. Bye-bye, have a good day.